Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the fourth webinar in our five-part Serving on Groups that Make Decisions fall webinar series. My name is Jan Sirik, and I'm the founder and former executive director of Wisconsin Facets, and I'm also currently the director of Sirik Consulting Services. And through that entity, I provide training for nonprofit agencies and others like I'm doing today for you all. I also consult with boards of directors and also provide interim agency management. I'm the parent of two adult sons, one of whom has autism, which is how I got into all of this exciting stuff to begin with. So just to review today's agenda for the webinar, we're going to do a quick overview of the Serving on Groups Guidebook resource. Those of you that have been with me for the other webinars in the series already hear that, so I apologize in advance. But we want people to really know about it. So in case I missed anybody that's new today, then you'll hear about it. There's 8 sections in the guidebook, and today we're going to cover section 6, using data as information. We're going to look at what is data, and then how to learn more about data that groups use in decision making. And then also, I just want to give you a sort of little caveat. Data can really be comfortable for a lot of people and really intimidating for others. I kind of fall in the middle. So I'm okay with some data, but others I have to look up because I can't remember, from 8th grade how to figure out some data. So hoping to lead you through a little bit of that today to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. We're also going to cover the 8 stages of data use. And then finally, I'm going to end with some additional resources that you can use. I want to do a quick poll, and this one I've done before with you, those of you that have been on. I just want to see what your experience has been with serving on decision-making groups, whether you've ever served on one before, or you're thinking about serving on one, or if you're on one now. If you're on one now, if you could type it either in the question box or the chat box, that would be great, just so I know kind of what you guys are all doing. Okay, so I'll leave this open to us. Okay, everybody voted, so I'm going to close this and share it out with you. And it looks like 50% of you have been have served on one before, a quarter of you never, and a quarter of you are serving on one now. Just looking to see. Okay, Heidi's on a parent group, and anybody else that's on one now. Okay. All right, I'll hide that, and we'll just go to the next slide. So here's the quickie Serving on Groups overview for those of you who haven't been with me before. Serving on Groups was developed in response to a need that Wisconsin Facets identified. We really found that it isn't enough just to invite parents to serve on decision-making groups, but often that they may need empowerment, they may need more information and support in order to be, more effective participants in the group. And so this resource hopefully provides that for parents, and the information really is also intended to support anybody on those groups, not just parents. And it applies to all kinds of decision-making groups, not just ones related to education and not just in Wisconsin, but really can be applied nationally or internationally, because I know somebody signed up actually today from international locations. So Wisconsin Facets developed the Serving on Groups Guidebook with funding from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Ed Programs. So I just want to give them acknowledgement. You're going to hear me refer to the resource as the guidebook for short. The research and review of this guidebook really was the result of the work with Facets, working with a large group of stakeholders from across Wisconsin that included parents, educators, state agencies. So really a whole slew of people had input on this. And there's something for everybody, we hope, in the guidebook. It's a great introduction for some. It's a welcome refreshment for others. And it's just a really good resource for anybody, including experts and mentors, so that everybody can come to the table ready to serve. The guidebook and many related resources can be downloaded for free from the Serving on Groups website, and you can see the link for the website on your screen. I want to give a big promotional shout out for the online learning platform for the modules that is on the Serving on Groups website. Wisconsin Facets recently updated this whole section, and it's really excellent. Just be sure to check it out. Just check modules at the top of the web page to get access to the modules. I mean, you can get them 24/7, obviously, because it's online. You can also order a hard copy of the guidebook from this site. So what is data? So data, most simply, is factual information. And you can think about times when you've come across sources of data that are confusing and hard to understand. I mean, how did you deal with that? There's points to consider when we discuss understanding data in decision-making groups, and we're going to go over that a little bit now. So when decision-making groups use data to make decisions, they're basing their decisions on facts, not just on guesswork or feelings. And this is called data-based decision-making, and you may hear this in some groups that you're serving on. Data, I want to mention, I mean, it doesn't just apply to some of the more formal decision-making groups, but it really often is used by any kind of group and can come in a lot of different forms. And so on the slide, there's a couple of important terms that you should be familiar with related to data. Reliable, valid, and accessible. So what does that mean? Reliable means the data is accurate and true every time. So would it be the same if somebody else collected the data? It should be. So if it's reliable, it means no matter who collects it, it's still going to be accurate and true. Valid means that the data reflects a truth and produces the desired result. And so, in other words, does the data measure what it says it's claiming to measure? And then the third one is data needs to be accessible. And that means that, what does somebody do when the data isn't clear or it's hard for them to understand? So you really need to, keep in mind who the audience is. What are their concerns and needs and abilities to understand and use the data. Reliability, just to go back to that one for a minute, oftentimes reliability problems in education show up when researchers overstate the importance of data that's comes from too small or too restricted of a sample. So like data from 5 people is probably not going to be as reliable as the data that you get from 25 or 100 or more people. So for example, I mean, just think about if I was a high school principal and I said to the school board that I had evidence that the parents love our school's programs. And then when the school board chairman asked me how could I make such a claim, I responded, by asserting that it was a conclusion based on hard data, specifically a survey taken at the last winter band banquet. And so the board chair might respond that because the event was attended by only 5% of the school's parents, and all the parents who attended had one thing in common, like they all had kids in the band, my conclusions were unreliable. And he would actually be right. I mean, claiming that such a small and select sample accurately represented the views of a total population, like the total population of all the school's parents, really stretches the credibility of my assertion well beyond, the reasonableness. So just remember that sample size is important. Confidentiality is an important term when it comes to data. And confidentiality is actually a set of rules or a promise that a person makes to limit access or put restrictions on certain kinds of information. When you're working with data as a group, it's important to always state if certain information should stay in the group and not be shared with others. If you're new to a group, you should make sure to ask questions about what data can be shared externally. Don't just assume that you can share it. You should really ask. Ask if there's a written protocol or policy that the group has about what information can be shared, and then be sure to follow it. If there isn't a written protocol for the group, and if you see that the group is handling data that probably should be kept confidential, you might suggest that the group develop a written protocol. I think that's really important. So there's basically 2 forms of data. Sometimes people confuse these two because they sound so much alike, but just to tell you which is which. And I apologize to those of you that know all this. I'm just trying to review it and go through it step by step. So some of you may certainly know all of this already. But this is just kind of like a refresher then for you. So the first is qualitative data. and the other one is quantitative data. And so the differences between the two: quantitative data deals with numbers. It's the data that you can measure, like length and height and area, volume, weight, speed, time, temperature, humidity, sound levels, cost, the number of members, the number of students, the ages of students, things like that. So when you think of quantitative, think quantity. And then the other kind of data is qualitative data, and this kind deals with descriptions. So data that can be observed but isn't able to be measured. This might include things like colors, textures, smells, taste, appearance, beauty. So when you think of qualitative, think quality. For example, when we think of weather, the quantitative data would be the exact temperature, the barometric pressure, and the wind speed. And then the qualitative data would be the more subjective stuff. So is it partly cloudy? Is it windy or calm? Is it cool or warm? And it just describes what's observed or felt. So key questions to ask about data that your group uses is on page 40 of your handout, that's section 6 in your guidebook. And so these questions include things like, what kind of data does your group use? Where does it come from? How does the group use the data to make informed decisions? And so you can ask for examples of how data was collected by the group in the past and conclusions that were done. So if you're on a group, be sure to ask for those kinds of things. You can ask if there's areas of the data that might be missing or that your group is unable to view and find out why that might be. And also ask for an explanation of data anytime you don't understand it. Okay, so here's the stage of data. So, using data in a decision-making group is really a process with multiple steps or stages. And these 8 stages help make sure a decision-making group is effectively using data to inform its decisions. And so as we go through the following next bunch of slides, we're going to go through each one of these stages. And I also wanted to point out for you that one of your handouts for today is the guidebook section 6, page 58 and 59, which is a tool for using data. And this is really a cool 2-page tool. It's like a template that groups can use to help work through the stages of data use. I mean, you can actually take this to your group and suggest using it. You can use it by yourself, or you can just share it with the whole group. This has all of the stages of the 8 stages on it, and then the questions related to each stage. You could, if you have your handout out, you could follow it as I go through these 8 stages, and you could just take notes if you wanted to. So the first stage is working with data, is to plan and prepare to use the data, and the group needs to ask questions, reflect, and plan before data is collected. So all data planning should really start with the question, what do we need to, what do we want to know? And this helps focus the data search and keeps your group on track. Selecting or collecting data isn't always about finding new data. Sometimes you just need to look at the data that you already have and then just talk about what data that you need. More often, groups spend time just trying to find the right data. So ask focusing questions that help pinpoint the information that you need to be able to make an informed decision and take action. Use a variety of methods and sources to collect data and select data. You're going to want to have multiple sources of data to inform decisions, not just, one source. Find out what data is already out there to use, what's the baseline or starting point, and then try to find gaps in information found in the current data. Pinpoint possible roadblocks in finding information and figure out how you might overcome them. You can ask people familiar with data to explain like what the school or agency, organization, or whatever entity you're working with as on your decision maker group knows, and have them share ideas and areas where there's not enough data to make what's called a hypothesis. I'll explain that in a minute. So the next step in working with data is to collect it. And the data should be collected for a specific reason or purpose relevant to the work of the group. You can collect data, the whole group yourself, or you can use data that somebody else collected. The question the group needs to answer when you're collecting data is, how do I find the data, both new and existing, that I need? Groups should only collect the data that you're going to use. If you get too much information, it can be really overwhelming, and too little isn't going to help you find the answers that you're looking for. So, for example, let's look at the data available that might be available for a group that's related to school or schools. And schools are like full of data. For example, there's student learning data. It's about the schoolwork and assignments of individual students. So this could be IEP data, state assessment data, graduation rate data. There's student demographic data, which are the personal factors about each student. So this could be attendance records, age, race, ethnicity, application and enrollment data. There's student perception data, and that's information about the school based on views of the school staff, parents, and the community. What's their perception of various things related to the school? And then there's school process data, and that provides information about school management, administration, structure, and general workings of the school. This could be budget, like income and expense reports, teacher to student ratios, class sizes, available space in the building, and things like that. Ways that schools can use families as a source of data include doing surveys, holding small focus groups. They can gather data from families participating or attending various school activities and events, or that just collect school perception data. It's important for schools to communicate to families why they're collecting the data provided by families and what they're going to do with the data. So, an example of collecting data, like the third Friday student attendance report, is one way that schools, usually have to collect data. So, two ways to, let's see. Hang on one second. Got out of order here. All right, so I'm going to do organizing data. So the third, so I'm sorry, I get confused. So the third step in working with data is to find a way to organize it, and organize it so that it helps other people to understand it. And just to let you know that data is organized for different purposes. So finding the right way to organize data should depend on both your audience and the data that you're trying to present. So two ways to organize the data are called aggregated and disaggregated. So let's look at the first way of organizing data. So aggregated data, what does that mean? It means combining all the data from the whole group, which gives you the big picture. So most data is first shown as an aggregated data, point. So, for example, teachers aggregate data to get an overall picture of their class. And so this is like the big picture view of data, and it's especially useful in sharing information with audiences such as your governing body, like a school board or something. Aggregated data is also appropriate for annual reports to the public. Now, the second one, which is on the right side of your screen, is disaggregated data. And a group may want to what they call disaggregate data, which basically means picking it apart. And disaggregating data means looking at the results or scores from the whole larger, the whole or the bigger group, but breaking it down by smaller groups to get more details. So like when you disaggregate data, you can dig deeper and deeper and deeper down into the data. So an example, like you could disaggregate data, district-wide data by school, or school data by grade, or grade level by classroom, or classroom data by child, and even deeper by child with or without a disability, or a child with a certain type of disability. And you can disaggregate 5-year data by year, or yearly data by month, or monthly data by week. And so each time that you disaggregate or further break down your data, you get a really better look at one part of the data. Sometimes disaggregated data can really surprise you. It can help your group decide on or prioritize action plans. And on the slide, you can see an example of the two ways to organize data. So aggregated data on the left side, there's a pie chart on there, which is just a way to picture data, and it shows the percentage of youth ages 20 to 24 that are not enrolled in school and also not working. You can see that 48% of them have less than a high school diploma, 32% have a high school diploma, 10% have some college, and 10% have earned their bachelor's degree or higher. Now, disaggregated data on the right side shows a bar chart with the data broken down into much more smaller pieces of data. So here you can see we're still looking at the youth ages 20 to 24 who aren't enrolled in school and also not working. But the data is broken down even further to dig in to see who those 32% of students with a high school diploma are by race and ethnicity. And on this chart, it looks like the highest number are Native American and the next are Black, African American. So the groups might look at data that is triangulated. You might hear that term. And the term triangulated data means that the group looks at or compares at least three or more different sources of data that apply to the same person, place, object, or subject. And they do this to see if the information from one source is supported by other sources. And so by comparing data from multiple independent sources, this can also provide some good sights into the data. For example, like a college admission process wants to see the whole picture of the student. So it answers the question, is the student ready to be successful in college, at our college, and how do we know? So this data includes not just the grade point average from high school, but it also lists things like volunteer and extracurricular activities, maybe an essay, like a personal essay about the student or by the student, an application form, references from teachers and coaches or other people who know the student, maybe an in-person interview, things like that. And put together, all of this individual information from multiple sources gives a much more accurate picture of the student. So another example, IEP teams often triangulate data to decide if a child has a disability. So, the law requires more than one test. So say results from 2 tests at school and an outside therapist test, or parent information about the child at home and in the community. A test result from a teacher, another test result from a different teacher, or maybe 2 evaluations from 2 different school personnel and information from the child's doctor. So all of those things, go together to call it triangulated data. So one way to organize data is to use a graph to make the data easier to understand. And you can see the picture of the graph on your screen. So formats like lists and tables and charts and spreadsheets and written and verbal descriptions help you see a visual representation of the data. So if you're looking at the graph, you have to make sure to read all of the labels that are included in the graph or the table. So reading a graph may be something that a lot of you already feel comfortable doing, or something that some of you haven't done a lot of in the past. So just remember to read all of the labels on the graph. Ask yourself, what is in each column, those colored things that go up and down? What is in each row, which would go the sideways things? What is the range of values, like which ones are the high ones and which ones are the low ones? Does the data have a direct or indirect relationship? Do the lines have positive or negative slopes? Like negative would be if those columns went below the line there, like if the red line went underneath the line instead of up. And then, where was the most change or growth and where was the least? And, always ask for help interpreting a graph if you don't totally understand it. It's really important. All data is just a snapshot in time. One way to show a snapshot in time is by using a pie chart to display the data. And a pie chart shows the information by dividing a circle, like the pie, into several parts, just like cutting a pie. And it shows how each part or each piece of the pie relates to the whole. And there always should be 100% when using pie charts. And we saw an example of a pie chart a couple slides ago, which showed the youth ages 20 to 24, blah blah. But now this slide shows another example of a pie chart. So for this one, a community member wanted to find out what students with IEPs were doing after they graduated from high school. And this pie chart was a great way to show community members what Wisconsin students with IEPs in high school were doing 1 year after graduation from high school. So if you look at the labels carefully, the numbers and the percentages, the color coding on the right gives you the clues to read this pie chart. So reading this chart, you can see that in 2021, the data shows that 22% of Wisconsin students were enrolled in higher education. This is students with IEPs. 49% were working in competitive employment, 3% were in some kind of training, 6% were in other employment, like supported employment or a sheltered workshop or something like that, and then 19% were doing something else. And just as a side note, a great source for graduation data is the Wisconsin Post-School Outcomes website. The link is at the bottom of your screen. This is also known as what they call Indicator 14 data, which states are required annually to collect certain data by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Ed Programs. They have to collect a whole bunch of indicators, but the indicator 14 is related to transition from high school, out of high school. And this website is really cool because it has outcome data for multiple years. And the link I also have on the resource slide at the end of the webinar, and it's also on your one of your handouts. So organizing data, another way that you're going to sometimes see data organized is by using comparisons. So using a bar graph or a line graph, which is what you see on your screen, it can help us compare the relationship between several variables. So variables might be things like a grade level or gender or English language learner or other different categories. And so studying this data can help you draw student achievement conclusions, for example. Now, if you look at the bar graph on this slide, and I should mention it's also on page 46 of your handout from section 6. It also, it shows a school district's total elementary enrollment of students during the 2012-2013 school year. And this bar graph shows us that 603 students in the district are distributed across 7 grade levels from K4 through 5th grade. And this information really can help the school or parents or any groups guide decisions on things like the number of teachers or other staff that are needed in a particular grade level. I should also say school board can help with that. For example, the class size policies they're present in most school districts. So, for example, say the class size policy states that 4K and kindergarten classes will have a range of 18 to 22 students per class. We would see, if you look at this graph, we would see 4 classrooms of 19 students and 1 classroom of 20 students in 4K this year. And the kindergarten, again going on the 18 to 22 students per class, they would have 2 classes of 22 students and 2 classes with 21 students. You can think about ways to use the information on a bar graph to answer other important questions that a school decision-making group or school board or somebody might need to make, like how will the number of students in each grade affect staffing needs of the school district? Or how do the enrollment numbers affect instructional needs, like how many textbooks and things like that do we need to look at? How to or the budget for the school district. So I'm going to have you do another poll, this one, which would be if you look at the graph, say we have a class policy of 25 students per class. How many 5th grade classes will the school need to plan for? Okay, I'll let you guys vote on that. All right. Okay. We'll close it now. All right. And share it back out. And the answer should be 4. So it would be like 95 divided by 25 students per class would be 3.8 classes. So if you round that off, the answer really would be 4. So I'm going to hide that. And we'll go on to the next slide. Okay. So data can also be looked at by identifying trends, and this means looking at or comparing data over time. So trends means over time. And looking at data this way can help a group make decisions and predictions about the future. So using baseline data, you can track progress. That means like the data that you started with. You can track progress towards goals over time. So, for example, to see achievement trends in different groups of students over time, it's helpful to use a bar graph or line graph or spreadsheet. So, when data from multiple periods of time, like weeks, months, years, so forth, is also displayed, then you can start to see trends form. So the graph at the top of your screen is called a line graph, and just underneath is a spreadsheet of the data. So these both show the trends in the Wisconsin Student Assessment System results for 2009-2010 school year to the 2013-14 school year. So um, for those of you who don't know, this includes both students who took the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concept exams with and without accommodations, and also students who took the Wisconsin Alternative Assessment for students with disabilities. These assessments have changed since then. They do a few different ones, but these were the ones that when we put this slide together. These tests were done with students in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. The statewide assessments have new names, as I said, now in Wisconsin. Now, the blue line represents all of the students in the state that took the test. The red line is all the students in the school district that's being looked at. And then the green line was students with disabilities. The purple line were students who were considered economically disadvantaged. You can look at either the line graph or the spreadsheet and see which group or groups of students are improving. So it looks like the purple line looks the most advanced over the 5-year period. The blue line shows a slight improvement of all students over the 5 years. And you can see which groups are staying the same or just improve slightly. It's, as you can see, it's useful to display data in a way that you can see the data long term in order to get a broad perspective about the information. So in stage 3, um, that's organizing data. We have to think about what to do to make sure that the data we're looking at are valid. And valid means sound or accurate. And so to be confident that we have that you can validate that the data that you have is sound or accurate, your group can use the processes shown on the slide to make sure that the data you want to use for making decisions is sound. One way to validate your data is to make sure to look for trusted sources for the data. Um, Another way is to follow up with questions to make sure data is accurate and understood by the group. And also, we should be sure to use many different ways of gathering data, as I said before, multiple ways to get the data. And also, finally, making sure that everybody in the group agrees with and accepts the findings of the data. So now we're going to go on to stage 4, which after collecting and organizing the data, the next step is to analyze the data. And analyzing the data means thinking about what the data mean and finding patterns in it. And analyzing data isn't really a simple process. So you might have to look at the data in several different ways in order to make a decision. So one of the ways to analyze data is to look for relationships in the data. And when you're analyzing data, you're looking for similarities, differences, trends, and other relationships in the data that might show information that the group otherwise couldn't see. So each view of the data provides really a unique insight, making it important to look at the data from many different viewpoints. Only after you study the data more closely do patterns become apparent, whether surprising or expected or just repeated. Sometimes data is collected automatically and because it's required by law or policy. So you have it available and you're able to ask questions about it later to be aware of the data as a whole, but also to be better understand the parts of information that's available from the data. For example, a school registration form is filled out by every family in August or whenever the school does it. This information about total school enrollment is stored in the school district's database, and often official school enrollment is also usually counted on the third Friday of September, and a report is shared publicly in October. So, in Wisconsin, anyways. So, a school board could sort and display the August registration compared to the official school enrollment data from the September count, and then also determine from either or both data sources if they want to know how many students are male, female, minorities, in a grade level, students with IEP, resident status, etc. And patterns might begin to be seen by looking at the data either as a whole or in parts. And, during analyzing this data stage, it might be possible to begin describing findings from the data as strengths or challenges. So strengths are results in the data that show a success. Challenges are results in the data showing areas where focus is needed. So remember, just don't draw conclusions from your data too soon. When you find and record data, you must always remind yourself to record information as it appears in the data source. Don't, definitely avoid analyzing the data too early. So this is a scary slide, sorry about that. But when you're working with numbers in a decision-making group, there's probably going to be unfamiliar terms that may come up when you're analyzing data as a group. So it's important to have a way of understanding some of the terms that you see on the slide. So mean, median, mode, range, outlier, statistically significant. You should know what all of those mean. You might need to dig up some of those definitions back from middle or high school math class if you haven't used them for a while, but not all of us work with numbers and data on a daily basis. So if we don't exactly understand what the terms mean, it can be kind of intimidating. And I know I had to go look up some of these because I couldn't remember them all. So some people in your group might need to have these terms explained in an understandable way. It's really important to understand these terms when you're working with numbers. So analyzing numbers can be done a few different ways. Depending on how it's done, the results really can be very different. So calculating the mean, median, mode, and range for a series of numbers can help analyzing the data, but first you got to know what they mean. So it's not always a good way to just show the average of a data sample because sometimes the middle value or the high or low difference is more important. So let's look at mean. So mean is the average of a group of numbers. So if you have 5 numbers, you just add them up and divide by, how many there are. So if you have 5 numbers, you add them all up and divide by 5, and that gives you the average or the mean. So for example, if you had 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, that equals 15. If you divide by 5, because there's 5 numbers, you get 3. So 3 is the mean for that group of numbers. Next, let's look at median. So median is the middle value of the numbers when you order them from smallest to largest. So this is better at showing like the actual middle of a data sample. So for example, if you had 13 data numbers, like all the ones that are shown on there, and you arrange them, you can just arrange them for 1 to 10, and then you find the middle number. Like if you actually did that, you'd have 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 6, 6, 7, 8, 10, and then you find the middle number, and that ends up being 3. So the median or the middle data point here is 3. All right, now let's look at the mode. The mode is the most frequent value, or the number that shows up the most in a data sample. So in the example that we just gave, there were 4 2s. So the most frequent number for that one was 2. So the mode was 2. So depending on what you're looking for in your data, that might be really helpful for you to know. Then range would be taking the lowest value and the highest value, and then find the difference between the two. So if you use the same number from the example, 1 would be the lowest value and the highest would be 10. So to get the range, you subtract 1 from 10. So it would be 10 minus 1, or a range of 9 points. And then the term outlier is also really important. An outlier is a very high or super low number that shows up in your data sample. So an outlier, if you have an outlier, it can really distort your mean, your average, for example. So if most of your data points were like from 1 to 10, but then you had one number in there that was 27, then 27 would be the outlier. Having an outlier might throw off your data, but it also might lead to more discussion and questions to have the group try to figure out why there's an outlier, what might have caused it, or what to do with it. Another term that might come up when you're analyzing data is the term statistically significant. And that means that the data results are probably true and not because of chance. Now, I have a few polls for you. So let's look at these polls. So this first one is, what is the mean of 4, 6, 10, and 12? So remember, you have to add up the numbers to get a figure and then divide by 4, because there's 4 numbers. So see what you can do here. All right, I'll give you a couple minutes. All right, everybody voted. I'm going to close this, share it out with you. And yep, you guys are so smart. The answer is 8. All right, I'm going to do one more. The next one is, what is the median of these numbers? Remember, the median is the middle number. Okay, I'm going to close this one out. And again, you guys are brilliant. That 15 was the middle number, so that was good. And I have one final one, I think. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this one is, what is the range of these numbers? So remember, for this one, you subtract the lowest number from the highest number. Okay, I'm going to close this, and yep, the answer was 11. So that was good. It's really good to be familiar with all of these. I'm going to just flip to the next one. So here's an example of working with numbers, and using these various data analysis terms, you can see the same example on page 50 of your guidebook. So in this example, Mrs. Smith checks her students' reading scores 5 times a year. So the graph on the left shows the January reading scores of her students, and you can see that the vertical line of the graph shows that the reading scores are based on a scale of 0 to 1800. So looking at the data, the mean is the average, or 817.3 on the chart, and it's figured out by adding up each one of the students' scores and then divide by 11, which is the number of student scores that are there. And so it adds up to 8,990, and then you divide by 11 and you get 818.3. Now the median, remember, is the middle number, or 825 on this chart. So in this case, you put all the numbers in order, like from 405 up to 1070, and the middle number is actually the sixth number, or 825. And then the mode, again, is the number which shows up the most in the data set. And in this case, 880 is represented twice, and so that's therefore the mode. And then the range, like we learned in the last slide, it's the difference between the highest number and the lowest number. So here the highest number is 1070, and the lowest number is 405, so the difference would be 665. And the graph on the right shows the reading score of just student A. This same chart is on page 50 of your guidebook handout. So the student A's reading scores during the whole school year are shown on the chart. So this is just one student, remember. And you can see that the student's second checkpoint in November is a score that could be considered an outlier because it's really up there. So the student A did unusually well, scoring 400 points higher in just 2 months. And then by the time January rolled around, he or she scored lower again and then showed steady progress through the rest of the year. But, if you were looking at the data, you could think about if the November reading material used to test the student included like a high interest area for that student, or something familiar contributed to the reason that he did so well. Or you could maybe think that the dip in January might be due to the student not feeling well or being tested with uninteresting reading materials, or was it exactly where the student should be? So remember, each score is always just a snapshot of that student's reading at that time, at the day and hour that he takes the test. One just doesn't know, however. What we do know is that the student made great progress during the year in reading. And one of today's handouts is working with and understanding data. And this is an activity that you can do yourself or use with your whole group as an opportunity to practice what you've learned so far with this webinar, and just related to working with the terms mean, median, mode, and range terms. And it'll help you and your group think about ways of looking at a source of data in a variety of formats, and to really practice analyzing data and answering questions about data. So I would suggest, take that handout out and use it with your group when you're dealing with data. Now, the next stage of data that we're going to talk about is stage 5, and that's developing what's called hypotheses and making recommendations. When you're developing a hypothesis, that means you're going to explain what the data represents and why it looks that way. And then you're going to decide what recommendations to base on the hypotheses. So now that you've analyzed the data, it's time to develop a hypothesis and use what you've learned. So data may tell you what's happening, but it doesn't always say why it's happening. So the more you analyze and understand the data, the better your conclusions and solutions are likely to be. So in this stage, you're going to try to figure out the why. So first, the group tries to understand why something's happening. So the hypothesis is developing a theory or a prediction about why we think something's happening. So you have all the data, and then you say, okay, let's develop a hypothesis. Let's get our theory about why we think it's happening. So your group could brainstorm possible ideas based on the data. You can look at other data. You can see if the other data helps support your ideas or not. If your group still isn't sure why something's happening, you can ask additional questions about the data, and your questions might clear up why something might be happening. The group must agree on the conclusions drawn from analyzing the data before you can make recommendations by the group. Once you know why something's happening, you can figure out possible solutions and recommendations that you can make. Now, the common format of a hypothesis is usually 3 parts. It has an if in it, which is like the cause, and then, which is the effect, and then because, rationale. So you always should have if, then, and because in a hypothesis. Now I'm going to shoot this out, and you tell me if you think that this is a hypothesis statement. So you either have to answer yes or no. So this is like if the school year is extended, then teachers may need to adjust learning activities because students, and I apologize because I couldn't fit the whole thing on there. Students may have difficulty paying attention for more instructional hours. So um, if the school year is extended, then teachers may need to adjust learning activities because students may have difficulty paying attention for more instructional hours. Yes, that is a hypothesis statement. I'm going to close that, share it out with you. Most of you said yes, and that would be correct because it had the if, the then, and the because in there. All right, let's leap on to the seventh step, which is using data to create an action plan. And in order to make something happen, after you look at a variety of the data, your group has to, should create an action plan. And an action plan can help you improve and encounter less challenges. It usually includes goals, steps, assignments, and deadlines. Some action plans will occur over a short period of time and have quick evaluations. Other action plans take longer and might require time to put in place. So let's look at the steps for creating an action plan. So first, bring key people together. So to design the plan. Next, create an action plan made up of action steps that are going to address all possible changes that might need to be made. The goals should be stated clearly, and you're going to need to figure out what action or change will occur as the result of the data that you collected and your hypothesis. Who's going to carry it out? When is it going to take place and for how long? Where will it happen? What resources, like what money or staff, are needed to carry out the change? And then logistics about communication. Who should know what and how are they going to find out? Then review your completed action plan and carefully check if it's complete. Then follow through on the work by actually using a timeline. Let everybody in the group know what's going on. Keep track of what's happening. And then celebrate when action plan goals are met. So I just wanted to do a quick poll, and you can check off what you think, which of these are part of an action plan. So the actual plan itself is what we're looking at. All right, most of you voted. Okay, I'm going to close this, share it out with you. The first three, 1, 2, and 3, are part of an action plan. The other two, while we've discussed it, it's not actually part of the action plan. So the hypothesis would be, it comes before you actually do an action plan. So the action plan uses the hypothesis and the data, but it's not actually part of the action plan. So, okay, I'm going to hide this, share this out. I'm going to hide that. All right. Then the next step then, that's step 7, would be to actually display and share the results. So when people of different perspectives look at the same data, they might make new conclusions and they might see ways to make changes that you didn't even think about. So this is how sharing data with your group internally or much more widely outside of your group can be useful, because you have your data, you share it out, and people can make different thoughts from it. So the group needs to present information that you find in your data in a way that's easy for an audience to understand. You have to make sure that whatever report comes from your group related to data is appealing. Keep it simple, clear, and visually attractive. It should be accessible, using a reading level accessible to your audience. Avoid jargon or acronyms that the audience doesn't understand. Use bulleted lists and the language spoken by the audience members. The report has to be accurate, so make sure that your data is free of errors, and the report has to be about what the actual data actually say, not what you wish it said. And then audience specific, so you focus on the issues that the audience cares about. Think about the level of detail that the audience needs and what the audience already knows. Be sure to be fair and objective. Use the data to drive decision making. It might be tempting to make a decision and then search only for the data that support it. Such selective choosing of data is unethical and not really useful. When you're planning how to share the results of your data, a lot depends on the audience. Who's going to see the data? When figuring out what, how, and even when to share the data. Different audiences need different views of the data probably. As you're preparing a report of the results, think about the following questions. What's the purpose of your report? Does it need to provide information? Is the purpose to just raise awareness? Is the report is the information new and surprising? What does the audience already know about the topic? What level of information do they need? Do they just need the big picture, or do they need a lot of details? So be sure to, your group should decide where this data can all be shared. So for example, like data related to the school could be shared with families, like at parent group meetings, with school board meetings, and publicly through the board minutes. It could be on the school district website or in the district's monthly newsletter. It could be in the community newspaper or even in social media, like on the school's Facebook page. Make sure that when you're sharing data, you make it come alive so that it's not like boring and doesn't really generate a lot of interest. So social math is a term that describes painting a picture with data. Sometimes numbers are just numbers when the context is missing or not familiar. So social math is all about relating data and numbers to what is familiar and concrete to your audience. It brings numbers down to earth by kind of blending them with compelling stories and providing comparisons with familiar things, and it kind of works by analogy. For example, like if everybody in the U.S. were to change their page margins from 1.25 to 0.75 inches, we would save a forest about the size of Rhode Island each year. We all know that paper comes from trees, so the visual of saving a forest, but not just a small forest, but a forest the size of a whole state, makes a big impression and could be pretty compelling. So social math, just to let you know, it could backfire if the story and the visual comparisons aren't linked good, well enough to the message that you want to give. Numbers can be presented in a memorable way, but you might sometimes cause an opposite reaction with your audience. So you have to be really careful about the comparisons that you use. Data stories are being used more and more to explain and to visualize information that's collected and analyzed. Behind every data example is a story just waiting to be told. So here's some strategies on telling a good story. Finding a compelling narrative. Think about your audience and what they know about the topic. Be objective and offer some balance. Don't censor the data in the visualization. Edit and try to really explain the data. On the left side in that little picture there, you can see an infographic. Think of all the infographics you're seeing on social media now, like on Pinterest and BuzzFeed. These infographics are visually appealing, but yet include a lot of data, information that people can relate to, and they're really interesting, and easy to look at. So the eighth stage is continuous monitoring for progress and improvement. And dealing with data doesn't end with creating an action plan or sharing out the data. This is only the beginning. Good data practice involves continually collecting and evaluating the data to make sure progress is being made. Groups should really check their work. That's regularly revisit the action plan which was developed, and regularly check in with one another, identifying challenges that might have come up along the way and making any changes that might be needed, celebrating successes when you accomplish things in your plan. When checking to see if your action plan is working, your group should collect the same type of data from the same sources that you originally used to start the data cycle. When data is used from different sources, differences in how the data was collected could really lead to different results. So if you originally received and used survey data from community members to make an action plan, you should again survey those community members to discover if your plan is working. You shouldn't survey students or staff to see if the decisions are making a difference. So you're going back to the same group to compare to compare results. So, like for example, we have a seclusion restraint report that's required in Wisconsin from all Wisconsin school districts annually that has to go to the school boards, and so sent the request is sent to the same list of school special ed directors. They collect information on the number of seclusion and restraints that were presented to each of their school districts in September. Um, it's collected from the same group each time, so that's really important. So, using data in a decision-making group, it's really a process to see if how well the action plan is working, and like effective continuous progress monitoring often answers questions like, to what extent has the initial question been answered, what new concerns have come up, what factors are clearly understood and which ones need more data, how has the situation improved. So monitoring for progress and improvement gives group members a chance to see the results of their hard work. When groups see good things happening in education or other venues based on their decisions, their drive to keep working at it is renewed. And if things aren't working as planned, the group can revisit the questions in their data and adjust the plan. So, um, so here's all of the data steps that we looked at, and just to keep those in mind, I want to I think I got that. Yes. So here are some great examples that I promised you for finding data and seeing how it's gathered and displayed. These are really excellent resources. It looks kind of overwhelming, but they're great, and these videos are really good. That third resource, the WISE-, which is the Wisconsin Information System for Education Data Dashboard. It's an example of where schools and families can go for lots of useful information related to schools. You can really dig deeply into some data. There's also another one here. Again, I love the second one, the nonprofit dashboard and signal light for boards of directors. This is good. That Blue Avocado is a great resource if you're on a board of directors. It has a lot of really good information. And here's the next webinar that we're going to cover, which is we're going to do section 7 and 8 on November 3rd, role of families and skills for serving on groups. And again, just go to the Facets website to register. And always, if you can't watch one of these live, register anyways, because you'll get the recording after it. And we did record the first 3, so you can get these links from Facets and the materials for those if you want. I just want to, before we end, I just wanted to give a heads up plug for this great upcoming 4-part workshop series. And these 4 workshops are going to dive deeper into serving on groups to make this resource even more relevant for your advocacy journey and serving on groups journey. This is a free series that's co-sponsored by Wisconsin Facets and WISPE, which is the Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. It's going to take place 4 Wednesdays in a row, starting February 8th, 2023. From 6 to 8, and it's via Zoom. So you can register or email Sherry Silla at that email address if you want to participate. And I just want to thank you again so much for joining me today. It's really fantastic that you're here. Again, your feedback is super important for our work at Wisconsin Facets, and you can do the evaluation I have in the chat box, the evaluation link, plus I said it'll be emailed to you later this afternoon. So I'm going to finish up with just one quick poll, and that is, do you think that this workshop was relevant to your needs? if you could please answer that for me before we leave. I know data is miserable and confusing, but it's also super useful in guiding the group of your, the work of your groups. So um, you can keep these notes as a cheat sheet for some of those mean, median, mode things if those are hard for you to remember. Okay, so everybody voted. I'm going to close out, and I really appreciate your being with me today, and I'm going to say goodbye and hope you make the next one. Take care, everybody. Have a good afternoon.